On my channel, I have already discussed whether Russia is a secular country or if she is a Christian country. Now let's twist this question a bit and discuss whether Russia is an Orthodox Christian country. Many people around the world believe so. Some think it is a good thing and some think it's bad. Nevertheless, Orthodox Christianity is often one of the first things associated with Russia, especially among people who do not know her well. Let's look closer, and in the end you'll be the one to decide if Russia is actually Orthodox Christian or it is more of a wishful thinking. Let's start with legal definitions and formalities. Since the early 1918, when Bolshevik Russia separated the church from the state and education, Russia has always been officially a secular state. In Soviet times, the state also promoted an anti-religious atheist ideology. The freedom of conscience was guaranteed by law, but most often than not, only on paper. According to the current constitution, the Russian Federation is a secular state. Various laws, legal reforms and amendments to the constitution have come close to contesting this, but formally and on paper, Russia is secular. The law on religious organizations lists 4 religions: Christianity, Islam, Judaism and Buddhism as traditional for people living in Russia, and also emphasizes the special role of Orthodox Christianity in Russian culture and history. But at least on paper, this does not give these communities any legal preferences. We can talk a lot about the reality and the privileges that, for instance, the Moscow Patriarchate enjoys in practice, but this would be another topic. As for now, let's just say that legally, Russia is not an Orthodox Christian country, but a secular state. Now, what about other dimensions, formal and informal? Many people, religious or not, refer to Orthodox Christianity as an authentic faith of our ancestors. Whichever side we take in the debates on church history, whether we recognize the current Russian Orthodox Church as the same or as an authentic successor of the one formed after the Christianization of Rus around the year 988, we can still safely say that Orthodox Christianity in Russia is more than 1,000 years old. There are certain issues with claims to origin, authenticity and historical roots, however. First, taking this approach, we have to take some event in history as a starting point, often deliberately. Before the Christianization of Kiev and Rus by Vladimir the Great, Russia was predominantly polytheistic and worshipped a pantheon of Slavic gods. There are many neo-pagan movements in Russia that refer to those times as authentic as compared to Orthodox Christianity, which has been in a seemingly unholy alliance with the state power since the very beginning. At the same time, engaging in such debates on authenticity, we should not forget that Kiev and Rus was not the same as Russia. Apart from Kiev, there were many different lands and city-states representing different tribes of what would later become the Russian people. The real accumulation of Russian lands into the Russian state only started in the 14th century, and hence one should know the difference between the different lands of Rus and what we now call Russia. One can make an argument that since what we know as Russia has taken shape, its titular Russian population had already been converted, if only by force, and hence Russia was an Orthodox Christian country both legally and in practice. But what about now, the contemporary country of Russia, after 70 years of anti-religious regime and the legacy of secular legislation? I have 3 main arguments against calling Russia an Orthodox country: the role of other religions, other Christian communities, and the nature of Orthodox Christianity itself. First, not all Russians are Christians, and I don't just mean fewer than 100% or let's say more than a half. Other religious communities are not just guests, diasporas, or minorities in the vast Russian lands. Throughout the long history of conquest, colonization, mission, and discovery, Russia obtained vast lands, some of which are populated by people of other religious traditions. Some assimilated more than others, but in any case, there are many regions that are majority Muslim, Buddhist, or polytheistic. I have recently made a video about Russian Muslims, and some of their lands have been part of Russia since the 15th century. Muslim religious and political leaders play a very important role in Russian culture and politics, and even though the Orthodox Church controls the religious market in the country, she constantly makes significant concessions to Islam and Muslims. There are many lands and regions that have traditionally practiced Buddhism and various forms of polytheistic beliefs. Most of these lands are strategically important for natural resources, military recruitment, and relations with powerful bordering nations. Just like in most of the world, Jewish people are mostly scattered around Russia. In the 1930s, Stalin's government decided to organize an ethnic region for Jews. Apart from Israel, the Jewish Autonomous Oblast is the only ethnic Jewish region in the world. However, the project largely failed. The Jewish population has never been more than 20%, and most Jews eventually left the agrarian Far Eastern land. Although it is still officially a Jewish region, for instance, Yiddish is its official language together with Russian, the Jewish population is much less than 1%. As in most of Russia. Anyways, the historical role of Jews in Russia is recognized, and Judaism is listed among traditional religions. Let's not forget about people with no religious affiliation. According to different censuses, from 7 to 18% of Russians claim no religious affiliation or belief. These stats are complicated by different definitions, like unbeliever, spiritual but not religious, or atheist. In any way, these numbers are too high to ignore and state a domination of any religious tradition at all, even Orthodox Christianity, which often claims about 60% of the population. But what about Christianity? Are Russian Christians predominantly Orthodox? This is not such an easy question either. According to statistics, yes, the majority of Russians identify with Orthodox Christianity and the Church. The media and propaganda often paint other Christian communities in Russia as foreign, either diasporic or straight-out alien to Russia. This is not exactly true. Many forms of Christianity, apart from the Orthodox Church, are authentic to Russia, and for most, if not all, of their history consist predominantly of local Russians. First, the Great Schism of the 17th century split the church into two factions. The majority, headed by bishops, recognized and accepted the controversial church reform launched by Patriarch Nikon. However, the significant part led by married priests didn't. They faced brutal persecution, but eventually they became the founding fathers of the now greatly diverse and widespread Old Believers movement. Many different churches, accords, communities, and groups of Old Believers vary significantly. Many of them do not recognize not only the Niconian Church, but also each other. Anyways, they are all rooted in the pre-Reform ancient church tradition and hence authentically Russian Christians. Apart from Old Believers, there have been numerous groups and communities split from the Orthodox Church on the grounds of theology, ecclesiology, hermeneutics, and so on. Many of them resemble evangelical Protestants in their worship practices and lifestyle, and some joined evangelical churches. Yet, communities of Dukhabory, Khlisty, Skopцы, Malakani, and many others are nowadays spread all across Russia and the whole world. Already mentioned, evangelicals emerged in the mid-19th century after the translation of the Bible into the then modern Russian language became largely available. Even though Russian Baptists, Pentecostals, and Seventh-day Adventists received their theology and worship practices from abroad, from the very beginning, their communities predominantly consisted of local Russian converts. Not always ethnically Russian, but local Russian nationals representing the wealth of ethnicities that have lived in the vast Russian lands for centuries. Apart from that, a century and a half of forced marginalization, isolation, and persecution formed their own authentically Russian practices, lifestyles, and ideologies. All these groups are Christian minorities. Even the most homogeneous countries have some religious minorities which can be disregarded if we want to make an argument, for instance, about Orthodox Christian Russia. However, the role of these groups in history, culture, economy, and politics is way too significant. Lastly, what about the Orthodox majority? How do people who identify as Orthodox shape the image of the presumably Christian country? As I have already said on this channel, it is not easy to say how many Orthodox Christians live in Russia. Most censuses rely on simple and superficial questions, such as, "What is your religion?" according to which they identify up to 60% of the population. As soon as anyone goes further and applies even a little stricter criterion, such as church attendance, prayer life, reading of the Bible, or partaking in sacraments, the number plummets to 2–3%. In order to deal with this gap, many researchers use two different categories for Russian Orthodox Christians. They call the most devoted and active believers the enchurched, воцерковленные, and the majority in and outs, захожане. This does not necessarily mean that the casual believers are not real Christians. Most identify with the faith as a national, cultural, sometimes ethnic, and family tradition. Most are also baptized, oftentimes as infants. Yet, we cannot judge those people, at least until the Church herself comes up with consistent criteria, because the Church leaders often refer to big numbers when it is convenient, and hence they claim those people. However, the role that the Church and Christian faith play in the life of casual believers does not support the argument for the Orthodox Christian nation. For most of them, Christianity is a tradition that they remember on special occasions, such as birth, death, marriage, or the most popular holidays. Even these holidays, Easter and Christmas, are celebrated with a prevalence of popular tradition, food, drinks, and sometimes presents, rather than fasting, liturgy, and remembrance of Christ. In their everyday lives, these people are common citizens. They have different habits, opinions, lifestyles, and families. Making decisions about their life, most people take into account family, money, individual circumstances and preferences, and rarely, if at all, religious convictions and teachings. The vast majority of the Russian population does not live an active religious life, and Russia is predominantly secular in reality. So, what do you think? Do you agree with my conclusions, or do you still think Russia is an Orthodox Christian nation? Maybe you believe that she is not, but she must become one. Maybe I missed some important point that you would like to add in the comments. Please share your opinion, but be respectful about it, especially to each other. Please like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you all next time.